Hello and welcome then to this week's episode. We are on episode 6 as we look at owning the room and presence and how we can manage behaviour with that. Okay, let's get into it. This week we're looking at presence around the room. We've got our timer then kind of over that way, and basically we're going to go for about 15 minutes, going to keep it nice and short. We're going to look at presence, what it means to have presence around the school, and how to basically present yourself to students. But just really want to remind you, over the next few weeks we've had a couple of suggestions come through with things that people want to see in terms of what to do when you receive verbal abuse from a student, how to do meet and greet, end and send, positive framing, signal, pause, insist, and routines, which we've kind of talked a little bit about before. We're going to go into more detail about in the next few sessions, and then language around choices and consequences as well. And there's plenty of other things that we'll offer over the next few months, but those are some of the things that are going to be coming up in the next few weeks. If you're interested in those, or if you want to send me a direct message, please do, so we can then kind of focus on those things. So in today's session then, we're going to look at having presence and what it means to have presence around the school, because ultimately behaviour is about what you give off in terms of how people perceive you. So it's part of the battle. There's a lot more to it as well, but that's really important in terms of how we present ourselves in front of students. I actually think that behaviour is 90% of that kind of act, that show, having a presence. If you remember back to when you were at school, I certainly do. I know if a teacher walked into the room, you knew within 30 seconds whether they were going to be someone who's going to be strict, control the room, or whether they were going to be someone that you could play around with. And I certainly remember some of the teachers that we had when I was at school. Some of them you just knew not to mess around. Others you knew you could get away with anything. And that's given off by your kind of presence in the room. And there's many things that give that away, whether it's like eye contact, your body position, how you carry yourself, how you walk in and out of the room, whether you kind of come across as being intimidated by the students. And it's really easy, particularly when you're starting out, to have those feelings. It's not uncommon. I certainly remember, like, going back to my first few years of teaching 20 years ago, when the thing that you first got used to is this going into the room and thinking, I've got to fill every single minute in this classroom because everyone's looking at me, they've got their eyes on me, they're following me around the room, and this feeling, this dread of like, I've got to fill every second because they're watching me. So if I'm picking up some paper, they're watching me, and how long do I take? And the truth is, actually, as you become more and more experienced, the trick isn't actually filling the time. The trick is actually trying to get their attention. We can easily be misled into thinking when we start off that they're watching us all the time. In actual fact, the skill is getting them to watch you, to track you around the room. We'll talk about like tracking the teacher, eyes on the teacher, and you want that engagement. So remembering back to when we're at school, how you start the lesson, how you kind of enter into that room, how you talk to the students, it's going to give away how confident you feel. It's difficult because if you're not confident, that's not something you can get straight away. It comes with time, so you have to almost reflect on that as well. So within the first 30 seconds, students will judge you, and you've got to, if you have given off that bad perception, you've got to then kind of control that and bring it back. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean, that whole thing of people saying don't smile till Christmas, don't believe in all that. Okay, there is time and opportunity to form those relationships. It's about doing the job, being professional. So think about how you're going to, start a lesson, how you're going to walk into the room, how you're going to be there, how you're going to meet and greet those students. We'll talk about specifically about those in another session, but think about how you're going to use your voice, how you're going to control that, how you're going to be confident. Take time to take a deep breath. Think about everything you're going to say. One of the things that I always say to staff when I'm kind of coaching and mentoring around behaviour is, if you're going to say something, think about what you're going to say before you say it. Don't just react. Take time to think about your words, and always think about what do you want as an outcome. So when you're talking, think about having that confidence, being there, saying, this is what I want, this is how I expect you to do these things. Own the room. That's what we talk about, is owning the room. The students are coming into your room, it's your domain. You need to make sure you've got it thoroughly prepped. If you're a regular teacher in a room and you can set it up how you want, that's perfect. Now as a senior leader myself, I find it difficult because I move around lots of different rooms, but I'm well established, so that's not an issue for me. But if you've got your own room, then you need to think about how you control that room, how you set it up, how you seat the students. And we've talked about seating plans before. Think about all of your non-verbals as they're coming in, how you're directing them to their seating plan, how you're communicating with them, how you can maybe just give them a thumbs up or just point to things. And again, how you do that, if you kind of like just pointing nervously, they're not going to respond. You've got to be just kind of like really clear. And I always like to think of, whenever I ask for something, I'm almost assuming that it's done. It's a foregone conclusion in my head. If I say, right, just seat yourself there, thank you, it's like I'm just saying thank you. And again, different people have different ideas around thanking students. Some people say you shouldn't have to thank them for something. I just think it's about politeness, and ultimately coming back to that thing that I've said before about modeling the behavior you expect from students, I think that's really powerful. If you can refer back to your own behavior and how you're treating them in conversations, so when a student's not behaving, you can say, well, look, I'm being respectful to you. I'd expect you to be, respond with being respectful back. There's no reason why you can't talk to me in that correct way. So that's the starting point in terms of that non-verbals, the eye contact, looking at a student and saying to I'm talking directly to you. I find it really interesting. Sometimes students don't always see where you're looking at. Even when I've got glasses on or take my glasses off, I don't need to wear mine all the time. Students sometimes are not always sure if I'm looking at them, so being really clear when you're looking directly at them that you're communicating with them is really powerful. The other thing, coming back to our Charlie Taylor's checklist that we used a few weeks ago, is using their names and being really confident, learning those names really quickly in terms of having that presence around the room and be able to talk to them directly. Using the name is really powerful because it's been proven many times if you use someone's name, it has far more impact on them because it's personal, it's directed, it's really, really clear. Obviously, remembering to keep things positive. We're not going to publicly shame anyone. Remember that if you're using the name, it should be about giving clear instructions, not having a go at them. And explaining why you've asked them to do something. We talked before about Simon Sinek. If you've not looked into any Simon Sinek stuff before, go and look at his beginning with why. Everything you do within education should stem from that why and having your understanding of your own personal why you're doing what you're doing. Why did you become a teacher? Why have you done things a certain way? We talk about our planning, our curriculum and curriculum intent. It's the same thing what you're doing that day. If you've asked someone to sit somewhere, if you can't explain the reason why, if you're just thinking, I'm just putting you there because I don't like you, that's your why. And you are communicating that to them in terms of your presence. When you come in, I always have this thing of no grudges, no matter what's just happened. Doesn't matter how much someone's upset you, when they come into that room, if they're coming in for a fresh lesson, it's a fresh start. And how you meet and greet them and how you treat them, they will interpret how the lesson's going to go. So if you start off badly, if you don't have good presence in that room, if you feel like you're a bit timid, shy, and you're not controlling the room, they're going to be like, oh, it's open season here. This is how we're going to go. This is what's going to happen. We're going to get away with doing whatever we want. Where if it's really clear and you're confident and you're talking about explaining why they're going to do things, so come in, sit this way. It's linked to establishing routines as well. You've got to have established these things over time. The first few times you do it, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be awkward. They might not meet your expectations. You might have to pick things up, making those phone calls home. Remember that most powerful weapon in your arsenal is the phone call conversation home. Ultimately, that is the only kind of major solution you've got to most of the problems is contact home. Too many teachers nowadays are reluctant or scared to phone home because they think that, well, if the child acts that way, the parent's going to be that way. And sometimes that might be the case, but it's not always the case. And it's also how you have that conversation. We talked about scripted conversations before, how you start that conversation with a parent. If you start attacking them by saying your child's misbehaving, it's only going to go one way in that conversation. So coming back to owning the room and having that kind of confidence to stand there is about them knowing you and your routines in terms of the expectations. So that takes time. You're not going to get it maybe on the first time if you're a new teacher. I know even as a senior leader, when I came to I've been to a number of different schools as a senior leader, I still have to establish myself. After you've been there a while, most people will turn around and go, well, you're senior leader, of course they do it for you. And yes, I do have those extra kind of powers and things that I can do, but I don't believe in that. So it should come because I'm a teacher, not because I've got a position of authority. So that's where we should be coming from, is that I've established myself. And when I've moved to a new school as a senior leader, I don't get that respect from students straight away. I will have that conflict sometimes with them. They will have the student who refuses to do as they're told because they don't owe me anything. I haven't built that relationship with them. It takes time. So whenever I'm having those things, it's about confidence, being standing there, controlling the room, explaining from an educational standpoint everything that you do. So if you ask them to stand up behind the chairs when they come in, if that's your routines, and again we'll talk about routines in another session, if that's your expectation when they come in, take time at some point to explain that to them. So this is why we do this, so that when we come in we're ready to start. It's swift, it's efficient, it means everyone's ready. Some students may want to challenge that, and again you've got to think about when they're challenging those things, you don't want to discourage them from having a dialogue and a conversation. It's about saying when it's appropriate. It's not appropriate to start a lesson to start arguing and discussing about whether they should stand up behind a chair or not. That's something you need to establish before or after the lesson and have an explanation with the conversation with them, saying this is my expectation because this is where I'm coming from, why. And with regards to everything that you expect from them, it's about having that conversation to say it's based on education. Whatever I do is for a sound reason, because it's about getting the best out of the lesson, giving you the best opportunities and making sure that they're learning at all times. So everything you do should stem from that point, and from caring, from loving them as a student in terms of wanting the best for them, and also from the point of that you want them to get those high qualifications, to do as well as they can, to be the best version of themselves. And again, it comes back to those key phrases that I talked about before. I often use things like be the best version of yourself, And I repeat that to them. So again, dialogue and scripted conversations comes into that idea of presence. And having a presence in the room is about having those repetitive sayings. So, and it's, you know, structure and routine, ready, respectful, safe. Having that dialogue and those conversations is important. And then be clear on when you challenge them about what you expect. One of the things I often will say to staff when I'm coaching them is I say, if you're in the middle of things, you know, even if the room's getting a little bit chatty, okay, you need to control it. You need to get it back to you. You've got to have that presence. You've got to stand there. You've got to get their attention. But don't just do it for the sake of it, because you just go, I just want them to be silent and then I'm not going to do anything with it. It's like, if you want them to be silent, then you stop them, you get them silent, and then you explain to them why you need them to be silent. So you're explaining, challenging the things that they're not doing right, and be really clear that, you know, that's what you're insisting on. So having those routines, whether it's the signal, pause, insist, expectations, framing things in a positive way, all of those things that we've kind of talked about or will talk about need to come into that presence, about owning the room. And the students, after time, you'll know when you're getting it right because they'll react. You know, simple things like if I walk down a corridor in my school, 99% of students, I only have to kind of look at them and then point to an item if it's the shirt not tucked in, and they just respond because that's that presence. They know. The best compliment you can have is when, you know, you hear your name mentioned in the corridor saying such and such is coming, because they know the expectations. Hopefully it's not for a bad reason, but it's about those expectations, that they know what the standard is before you even get there, and they know that about your classroom. It's about them understanding what they need to do because they see you, they know what comes with you, and so it's just really clear on what they've got to do when they come to that classroom. Owning the classroom, making sure it's your own domain, is the most powerful thing you can do. And the students, they want that structure and routine. They want that ability to know that they're safe, that they're respected, and that you can trust you as an adult. It takes time. It's not something that just happens overnight, but you have to start from day one. Think about, before you go into that lesson, plan out what it is. How do you want to communicate with them? Not just verbally, but with the non-verbals as well. Your position in the room, how you greet them. Okay. People will have different ways of greeting them. I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs and that. Some people have things that work for them. It's about what works. We talked about that before. Not slipping into these fads of, oh, I'm just going to do this or this and this because I've seen it somewhere. It's like, try things out by all means. You know, you've got to experiment. But ultimately, whatever you're doing has to be focused on the learning that takes place, and maximising that opportunity to learn. You can't be doing all these things that distract away from it or take time, takes too long. So presence in the room, being at the center of everything, making sure you've got everyone's attention when you want it, because don't forget, sometimes you don't want their attention. You want them to be working on things they're going to be working on. That is what it means to own that room, to have that presence. Remember, like I said, 90% of the time when you're a teacher is about performance. It's about acting. It's about pretending to be bigger than what you are, to get their attention, to get their understanding, to know what they're doing, to talk to them. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be kind of flamboyant. You don't have to be kind of really over dramatic, but it is about controlling that room. Some people can do it really quietly, can do it ever so gently and calmly, and being really assertive and making it sure that the students know exactly what they want them to do. So there's lots of different ways to do it. There's no right and wrong way. It's about what works for you, and it will vary on your personality style. Go and see other people. Go and see how they own the room, how they command that room. From my own experience, and again, I'm slightly biased, PE teachers are particularly good at it, particularly practical subjects, or it's drama teachers as well, very good at commanding the room. So if you're struggling as someone who is maybe one of the core subjects like an English, maths or science teacher, go and visit some of those other ones, because they tend to be people who naturally have that kind of control of a room, particularly if they're in practical subjects where they've got kind of a busy room. I know certainly when I moved from PE into maths, I found it really easy to command that room because I'm used to doing it out on an open field, or whether it's in a sports hall where the acoustics are really, really bad. So a lot of it is non-verbals, or I was using my whistle. Can't use a whistle in the classroom because it just deafened the students. But that presence is really important, and how, you know, you communicate that, whether it's with hands up to get their attention. Lots of different ways that you can own that room and control the environment without having to just scream and shout and yell. And actually, the calmer you are, the better it is. We'll talk more in future sessions like this, where we'll talk about, you know, different strategies you can use to get their attention, whether it's writing things on the board sometimes to mix things up to get their attention, so it kind of throws them a little bit, because you don't want it to be the same all the time. But in terms of being in the classroom, how you stand there in the position where it's kind of that authority position, where it's like confidence, how you talk to them, how you walk is really, really important. But also kind of recognise that sometimes you might make mistakes. I know I've done it before, where I've come in and stumbled in a room, and you don't want them to just think you're some bumbling fool. It's kind of like, oh, didn't see that there, never mind. And just being confident to ride it out. If you make mistakes, sometimes embarrassing things happen to teachers. I won't go into one of my friends who split his trousers in the classroom. That is a whole other story. But don't be afraid if something bad happens to just kind of like style it out, falling with style, Buzz Lightyear style, in terms of these things happen to us. Just have the confidence to ride it out if you make a mistake. That I think is quite a key one. Sometimes embarrassing things happen to a teacher and you have to just kind of style it out and be like, it's okay, that's fine. If you trip over something, I've done it before, I go trip over a step and go, step there, watch out, and just carry on like nothing's happened. The students will giggle and laugh. Don't fall out with them, it's funny. And sometimes teachers make that mistake if something embarrassing happens to them and then they pick on the first child. It's the worst thing that you can do, so please don't do that. Own the room, command respect from the room, have that presence, but ultimately form those relationships with the students, and they will eat out of your hand and they will love you for it. That's it for this week. Hopefully it's been of use, and I look forward to seeing you next time in the next video. Take care. Thanks.